Hello everybody and welcome to my latest edition of shows. What we're going to do in this show obviously is a bit of a book report. What I'll do is I will take a book and I will tell you what the book is about, what goes on in the book, and what kind of players this book would be good for. One of the big questions that you get a lot of the time when you listen in the chats and you're reading stuff is people want to know what books can they use to improve their chess. So, obviously, people have a lot of suggestions of good books, but, they don't really tell you what the book will give you. Okay. This is an old classic, My System, from Aaron Nimzovich. A lot of people, I think, don't like this book. I do think it's mostly just because the book is sometimes a little bit messy, but I will say that the book does have a lot of basic information. So if you're just starting out from trying to understand a bit more strategical and positional positions, then this book will definitely help you on your way. What happens in this book is in the first big chapter, basically, he covers a few of the Steiner's elements. Steiner's elements is basically the basis of all positional and strategical concepts, which you will see in a lot of different books, in different ways that they explain them, and the more in-depth they go, etc., etc. In this book, he covers a few of the more basic, more interesting ones, and I don't particularly think that he does too much on them. Sometimes his wording can be a little bit tough and so on and so forth, but it's the kind of book that you can just work through, and acquire quite a bit of knowledge. Okay, and like I've said before, you need to acquire the knowledge, then you need to try and understand the knowledge in order to apply it to your own games. So, this book is going to give you that knowledge and try and show you some situations where you basically can apply, this knowledge to your games. So what we're going to do is we'll start with I'm going to show you a couple of positions in the book as well. Just some basic concepts, just so you can get an idea of what goes on in the book. So let me just transition here real quick. There you go. So in this position, you'll have a quick look and you'll see quickly that there's one open file and there's one semi-open file. There's another open file here. This is another semi-open file. Okay. So what he wants to show here is just how powerful the rooks can be when they gang up on a file. Okay, so in this case, they cannot gang up on this file here. Let me just make it a different color. It's a bit hard for them to gang up on this file because the bishop covers this square. Okay, so what they end up doing is he plays just rook h2, okay, which obviously just attacks the pawn as well. Now black has to start defending this pawn. Black plays king h7, okay, and we double up on this, so now we've got two attackers on this pawn here. Okay, he defends with the bishop. You try and use the smallest pieces available to defend with, because of course your big pieces don't want to be stuck defending pawns. And now the knight comes into f5, which is a really nice little outpost. If you don't know what outposts are, he covers this as well. So, it's another just basic Steiner's element. Okay, this knight here, obviously there's no pawns that can, attack this knight, which means, and he doesn't have a white squared bishop, so this knight is going to be a beautiful piece to just sit there the whole time. Okay, now there's only two ways for black to try and continue defending this pawn. None of them really work. So let's say rook b6, obviously trying to defend this pawn. So now he's got three defenders. We have these two guys, and we have the knight attacking. Okay, so it's 3-3 equal at this point. But now there's this nice little move in between here where white can just play d6 and blocking the rook from defending the pawn. Okay, blocking is also a type of tactic, which we'll get to eventually in our lessons. Okay, now the problem here becomes that if you take with the rook, obviously, we'll just take here and then take here, and then we end up forking your king and bishop anyway, so you lose the whole rook. If you take with the bishop, on the other hand, then after knight takes check, king has to go here. We could just win the piece, but we could also win a rook this way around by just taking this rook. Okay, so this would be a skewer. Okay, so let's have a look at the next position real quick. I don't want to spend too much time on these positions. This is a bit more complicated one. Here he's just trying to show you how to provoke weaknesses. Okay. The knight goes into this little outpost idea here. Now, the problem is, of course, is that this pawn could chase away the knight, okay? But if he does so, which, you know, is one of the options here, we just drop back with the knight, and now suddenly this pawn is a big, big weakness. So we just end up ganging up on that pawn. So if he defends it, let's say with something like that, and we can just play here, and we just gang up on that pawn. Okay, so it becomes a problem of creating a weakness in his pawn chain. Okay, so in this case, you know, if black were to try and defend with, like, let's say rook here, now of course he always has to be worried about this fork here, and of course c6 is still not an option because obviously d6 is just going to be another problem once again. So, you know, he shows you all kinds of different little things to consider when playing a game. Okay, let's have a look at the next one. So this is just a superior rook. Okay, I mean, it's completely equal here, and a lot of these endgames can be drawn because of the rooks, but all he wants to show you is just the super activity of this rook. Okay, if you were to play here, just as an example, then all white has to do is just charge up here with his king, obviously either to there or there. Okay, so the king just comes in and supports the attack of all these pawns. Okay. So having this active rook on the 7th rank, okay, so this is obviously a little chapter about having rooks on 7th ranks, okay, so that's why you want them on open file so that they can advance to the 7th or 8th ranks and be a big, big menace to your opponent. Now, next position, this just shows you some ideas of how to look at pawn chains to tell you where you should be attacking in the game. Okay, let's look at the typical French defense. Okay, let's look at something like this. Now, what the pawn chain tells you here is if you look at it and you draw a little line like that, you can see that the pawn chain is pointing in this direction. Okay, which means that white typically will want to attack on the king side. If we swap this board and we look at black's formation, then we can see that black's formation is pointing this way, which means that black wants to attack on the queen side of the board, which is exactly what he's doing with something like c5. Okay, so typical continuations is something like this, yeah, so black continues to put pressure on this pawn here, which is the pawn chain, part of the pawn chain here, and probably the only weakness on the pawn chain right now. So you quickly can see what happens and where to attack at least. Okay, in our next example, which is also a very popular opening, is in the King's Indian defense for black. Okay, white gets the strong pawn center, okay, which black then eventually kicks back into, and after the typical move, something like this, you can have a quick look at the board and you can see that, okay, white's pawns are pointing this way, which means that he's going to want to play stuff like this and attack on the queen side, whereas if we look at black's position, his pawn chain is going this way, which means he's going to want to move his knight, let's say somewhere there, and push f5 and get these pawns rolling on the king side. Okay, so he explains just some ideas of looking at the pawn chains to give you an idea of where to go next. Okay, this is a little bit more complicated position. Okay, what he tries to explain in this one is to try and show you, let me actually flip this to black's position, as he shows you how to play against doubled pawns, okay, and against all kinds of different weaknesses and stuff like that as well. This one's a bit tricky. Okay, so here what black wants to do is black wants to get to this square and this square with his knights. So, you know, something like this would be a perfect idea. So he starts with knight h7. Okay, white can almost never take here in the center because then this double c pawn, let's say something like that, let's say we just take back with the pawn. Now these two pawns are really, really bad. You can just keep on ganging up on them now, so it could be a big problem for him. Not a very good idea to have those doubled pawns, isolated double pawns for that matter. Okay, so, and he also never wants to really play d5 because this just creates the same problem. This pawn, these double pawns are easy to blockade with the knight here. Okay, and then we can start ganging up on these pawns here. Maybe we can get our queen in here we can just try and start putting some pressure on those pawns. So after knight h5, you know, it doesn't really matter. He plays h3, we go knight f8, heading for e6, say knight there, and he attacks e6. Now there's two attackers. Okay, so now you can quickly see there is two attackers on this pawn. Again, we want him to take, or we want him to push, because that'll just help our position so that we really iterate the problem of these double pawns. So bishop e3 protects the pawn, and now we play c5, forcing the matter. So now he has to choose. He either pushes the pawn or he has to take one of those pawns. So we force this weakness of this double pawns. So he played here, and after knight f4, you can quickly see we have a nice little outpost here. If he were to take here, then after pawn takes, we have this really nice square here for our knight, which is a great outpost. And also, after the knight gets here, it would put pressure on this pawn, something like this. Maybe again queen here if needed. We definitely get a lot of play in this position. Okay, and of course with the knight on here as well, the knight can also help attack here. So like maybe queen there and f3. So we have so many options here for black, and white is finding it very hard to find a way to play from here. So he doesn't take, he plays bishop e2, and after this knight coming here, now this knight just wants to go to g6 and help with the attack. Okay, now of course we still have these weak pawns here. This queen is blocked in here. White's pieces are very cramped, which is one of his biggest problems. So basically that is where the position stops. Well, I just don't feel like I need to go deeper. It just, you know, he really shows you a lot of different ways of how to play against a double pawn. Okay, next position. This one's an interesting one. It's completely equal in this position from a material point of view. But what he would like to show you here is just, you know, how you can find a weakness and work around it. Okay, we can see that both players here has a really nice outpost. Okay, but the difference here is the pawn chain that supports the outpost. Okay, this pawn, let me just make it a different color, is protected by a pawn, whereas, well, the whole pawn chain here looks very strong. Okay, whereas this pawn chain here is a bit weak because of the d6 pawn. Okay, so quickly we can see how white rearranges his pieces after knight e3. Okay, you know, let's just make any moves here for black. h6, queen goes to d5. So now the queen hits onto this little outpost here. Let's again make another move. I don't really care. The knight goes to c4, and you can quickly see how we start attacking this pawn here. Okay, so the d6 becomes a big problem, and we can just keep on hitting it. Let's say if you try to play rook a7, we could just play e5 now because of this pin here. So we start putting a pressure, and as soon as we start pushing pressure on this pawn, then this pawn falls, and then this knight does not have a great outpost anymore. So we undermine it. So in this chapter, he shows you how to find weaknesses and how to try and undermine them. I think that is it, just for the basic idea of what the book is about. Like I say, you know, sometimes the book can be a little bit outdrawn, but I think a lot of players, you know, let's say 1500 strength and up, you know, from 1500 to 1800, 1500 to 1900, you know, if you don't understand these positional and strategical concepts yet, then this is a book that can get you just a lot of knowledge really quickly. Like I always say, you know, acquiring knowledge is not so hard in chess. It's really understanding the knowledge and then applying it to your chess that is the big issue. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I will try and do as many of these books as I can. I have a lot of books. So yeah, so if you're looking for a book to learn a little bit, then check out my system. It's an old one, but it's a good classic, and for good reason. Cool. Thank you guys. Hit me some likes, obviously, you know, give me some chatter down at the bottom. I'd love to hear from you guys. If there's books that you would like me to report on, then please just put your suggestions at the bottom. And otherwise, follow me on Twitter, subscribe to my channel, and give me some likes. Come on, I need some likes. Need some likes. What a foolish ploy. Thanks, guys.